I used to believe that love could conquer anything, that when you truly cared for someone, their dreams became your dreams, and their success became your success. I thought that standing by someone through their struggles would mean they'd stand by you through yours. That was before my husband walked out on our 3-year marriage, telling me I'd never amount to anything more than a small-town waitress with big city dreams. What he didn't know was that while he was climbing corporate ladders and networking at fancy cocktail parties, I was building something he could never tear down. 6 months later, when I handed him divorce papers at his wedding to his new fiancée, the look of shock on his face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent proving him wrong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. It's getting ahead while they're busy looking down on you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Thai lunch rush at Sunrise Diner was in full swing, and I moved through the cramped space between tables like I'd been born to it. Coffee pot in one hand, order pad tucked into my apron pocket, I could balance 3 plates on my left arm while simultaneously refilling water glasses and remembering that table 6 needed extra ranch dressing. After 4 years of working at Austin's busiest neighborhood diner, I knew every regular customer's usual order, their preferred seating, and exactly how they liked their coffee. My name is Jessica Martinez, but everyone at the diner calls me Jess. 28 years old, born and raised in a small town outside San Antonio, and I'd been serving hash browns and dreams at Sunrise Diner since moving to Austin with my husband, Ryan, 4 years ago. Most people saw the polyester uniform and the name tag and assumed that was all there was to me. They didn't know about the business courses I was taking 3 nights a week at Austin Community College, or the detailed notebooks I kept at home, filled with observations about restaurant management, customer service psychology, and event planning strategies. What they definitely didn't know was that I'd been quietly saving 75% of my tip money for the past 2 years, building a nest egg that had grown to just over $40,000. While Ryan thought I was barely making ends meet on a server's salary, I'd been creating a financial foundation that would have surprised him. Every night after my shift, I'd sit at our kitchen table and record not just my earnings, but observations about what made customers happy, what made events memorable, and how small details could transform ordinary moments into special occasions. Ryan and I had met during my first week in Austin, at a coffee shop near the University of Texas campus where he was finishing his MBA. I was waiting tables at a small cafe to pay for my own night classes in hospitality management, and he'd come in every morning before his finance seminars, ordering the same large coffee with 2 sugars and a blueberry muffin. He was charming in that confident way that comes from knowing you're destined for success, with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that made me believe I was the only person in the room. After 3 weeks of morning small talk and lingering glances, he finally asked me out. Our first date was dinner at a modest Italian place where he talked passionately about his plans to work for a major financial firm, maybe start his own investment company someday. He seemed genuinely interested when I told him about my dreams of opening my own catering business, about how I loved creating experiences that brought people together around food and celebration. 2 years of dating led to a courthouse wedding that we promised ourselves was just the practical first step before the real celebration we'd have once we were both more established. Ryan landed a position with a mid-sized investment firm right after graduation, and I continued working at the diner while taking business classes at night. We lived in a small apartment in East Austin, nothing fancy, but it was ours, and I thought we were building toward something together. For the first year of our marriage, everything seemed to be progressing according to plan. Ryan was learning the investment business, working long hours but coming home excited about deals and client meetings. I was mastering every aspect of restaurant operations while secretly developing business plans for my own catering venture. We'd sit together on Sunday mornings, drinking coffee and talking about our future. The house we'd buy in a few years, the vacation we'd take to celebrate our 5th anniversary, the way our different skills would complement each other when I finally launched my business. But somewhere in the second year, things began to shift. Ryan's company started landing bigger clients, wealthier clients, and suddenly our Sunday morning conversations included more stories about the expensive restaurants where he was taking prospects to lunch, the exclusive country clubs where he was networking, the social events that were becoming crucial to his career advancement. He'd come home from these events talking about the wives and girlfriends of his colleagues, women who worked in marketing for major corporations or had their own successful businesses, women who could hold their own in conversations about stock portfolios and investment strategies. I started noticing the way he'd introduce me at the occasional company social events I attended. "This is my wife, Jess. She works in food service." Not, "She's building her own business," or "She's studying hospitality management." Just food. Service. Delivered in a tone that made it clear he considered my work temporary, something I'd outgrow once I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. The comments became more frequent and more pointed. When I'd get excited about a particularly successful shift at the diner or a customer who'd complimented my service, Ryan would nod politely but then redirect the conversation to his own work challenges. When I mentioned an interesting concept I'd learned in my business classes, he'd listen for a moment before explaining why the real world was different from academic theory. He never said my dreams were worthless, but he had a way of making me feel naive for pursuing them. Helen Chang, the owner of Sunrise Diner, had been watching this slow erosion of my confidence with the sharp eyes of someone who'd built her own business from nothing. A 60-year-old Taiwanese immigrant who'd opened the diner 15 years ago with her late husband, Helen had a way of seeing through people's facades to what they were really made of. She'd often find me during quiet moments between the breakfast and lunch rushes, sitting at the counter with my business textbooks, and ask thoughtful questions about what I was learning. "Jess," she said one afternoon as I was reviewing notes, "from my restaurant management class, you know more about running a food business than most people who call themselves entrepreneurs. When are you going to stop preparing and start doing?" Her question caught me off guard, but it planted a seed that would grow over the following months. Helen had noticed things about me that Ryan seemed to miss entirely. How I'd naturally stepped into leadership roles during busy shifts, coordinating between the kitchen and the floor staff to keep orders flowing smoothly. How customers specifically requested my section because they knew I'd remember their preferences and make them feel welcomed. How I'd developed small improvements to our processes that increased efficiency without anyone asking me to do it. "Your husband," Helen said one day, her directness catching me off guard. "Does he understand what you're building here?" I must have looked confused because she continued. "Not just the money, though saving tips takes discipline most people don't have. I mean the knowledge, the relationships, the reputation. You're not just serving food, Jess. You're studying how to make people happy, how to create experiences they'll remember. That's not a skill you learn in business school." I realized Helen was right. While Ryan saw my job as a stopgap, something to pay bills while I figured out my real career path, I'd been conducting an intensive, hands-on education in hospitality management. Every difficult customer I'd won over, every chaotic shift I'd helped organize, every special request I'd fulfilled was building expertise that no classroom could provide. But this understanding was developing in isolation. At home, Ryan's career was consuming more of his attention and energy. The investment firm had landed a major client, a family-owned business empire that was looking to diversify their holdings, and Ryan had been assigned to the team managing their portfolio. Suddenly, his days were filled with meetings at exclusive restaurants, his evenings with networking events at the country club, his weekends with golf games that were crucial for relationship building. The social climbing was subtle at first. Ryan started paying more attention to his appearance, investing in expensive suits, and getting his hair cut at an upscale salon instead of the neighborhood barbershop he'd used throughout college. He joined a gym that catered to young professionals and began talking about the importance of positioning yourself for success in a competitive industry. I tried to be supportive, understanding that his career required a certain image and that networking was genuinely important in his field. But I couldn't help noticing that I was increasingly absent from his professional life. Company social. Events became optional for spouses, then gradually stopped including me altogether. When I asked about it, Ryan would explain that these were working dinners or client meetings where bringing family members would be inappropriate. The distance wasn't just professional. Our conversations at home became shorter and more superficial. Ryan would come back from his networking events full of stories about fascinating people he'd met, exciting deals in development, opportunities on the horizon. But when I'd share news about my classes or my growing savings account, his responses became perfunctory. "That's nice, honey," followed by a return to his phone or his laptop, checking emails from clients or researching investment opportunities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 6 months ago, everything came to a head in a conversation that started over something as simple as dinner plans. Ryan had called to say he'd be working late again, the third time that week, and wouldn't be home until after 9. I'd been planning to cook his favorite meal, partly to celebrate a particularly good week of tips, partly to try to reconnect after feeling like ships passing in the night. "Can't you just grab something while you're out?" I suggested. "It seems like you're eating at restaurants more than at home lately." I meant it as a gentle observation, but Ryan's response revealed how wide the gap between us had become. "Jess, these aren't casual dinners. This is work. Important work that requires a certain level of sophistication." His tone had an edge I'd never heard before. I can't explain portfolio diversification strategies over hash browns at a diner. These clients expect to be taken to places that reflect the caliber of service they're receiving. Something in his phrasing struck me wrong. "What's wrong with diners?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Good food is good food, and good service is good service, regardless of the setting." Ryan sighed, the kind of exasperated sound you make when someone just doesn't understand something obvious. "It's not about the food, Jess. It's about the environment, the image, the connections you make. These people move in certain circles, and if you want to do business with them, you have to be comfortable in their world." "And I wouldn't be comfortable in their world?" The question came out more defensive than I'd intended, but his implication was clear. "That's not what I mean," Ryan said, though his pause suggested it was exactly what he meant. "It's just that your experience is different. You understand working-class customers, everyday people. These clients are different. They have different expectations, different standards." That conversation marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Over the following weeks, Ryan became more open about his frustrations with our lifestyle, our social circle, what he saw as my limited ambitions. He'd make comments about other couples in his professional network, wives who contributed to their husbands' careers by hosting sophisticated dinner parties or joining the right charitable organizations. Victoria Sterling, he mentioned one evening, referring to the daughter of his firm's most important client, is organizing a fundraiser for the Austin Children's Museum. She's got connections with every major donor in the city, plus the organizational skills to pull off an event that'll raise serious money. That's the kind of initiative that makes a real difference. I bit back the urge to point out that I organized events every day, just on a smaller scale and for working families instead of wealthy philanthropists. Instead, I asked, "Would you like me to get involved in charity work? I'd be happy to volunteer for causes we care about." Ryan's expression suggested I'd missed the point entirely. "It's not about volunteering, Jess. It's about moving in circles where you can make meaningful connections, where your efforts have real impact. Victoria's fundraiser will probably generate $250,000 in a single evening. That's impact." The comparison stung, particularly because Ryan seemed genuinely impressed by Victoria's accomplishments in a way he'd never been impressed by mine. When I'd successfully coordinated service for a 200-person wedding reception at the diner, managing everything from dietary restrictions to timeline coordination, Ryan had nodded politely and changed the subject. But Victoria's ability to organize wealthy people into writing checks earned detailed admiration and analysis. I began to understand that Ryan wasn't just growing apart from me professionally. He was growing ashamed of me. My work, my background, my dreams were becoming embarrassments he had to manage rather than assets he valued. The woman he'd fallen in love with, the ambitious waitress who was putting herself through business school, had become a liability in his climb toward the social and professional circles he wanted to join. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday evening in March. Ryan had been working late more frequently, attending more networking events, spending more time at the gym, essentially building a life that had less and less room for me in it. I'd been trying to convince myself that this was just a busy period at work, that once he'd established himself in the firm, we'd find our way back to each other. That evening, he came home at nearly 11 o'clock, claiming he'd been at a client dinner that had run late. He seemed distracted, almost guilty, checking his phone constantly and giving short answers to my questions about his day. Finally, I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "Ryan, are we okay?" I asked. As he sat at the kitchen table, still in his expensive suit, scrolling through emails on his phone, "I feel like we've been living separate lives lately." He looked up, and for a moment, I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not anger or frustration, but a kind of resigned sadness, as if he'd been dreading this conversation, but knew it was inevitable. "Jess," he said slowly, setting down his phone, "I think we need to talk about where we're heading." My stomach dropped, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" Ryan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that used to be endearing but now seemed calculated, as if he was preparing for a difficult business presentation. "I've been thinking about our future, about what we both want out of life, and I'm not sure we're as compatible as we used to be." "Compatible how?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Our goals, our social circles, our lifestyles," he said, listing them like bullet points in a business memo. "You're happy working at the diner, taking a few classes here and there, and that's fine for you. But I have ambitions that require a different kind of partnership." The clinical way he was discussing our marriage made me feel like I was being fired from a job I'd thought was permanent. "What kind of partnership?" I managed to ask. Ryan's answer revealed just how far apart we'd grown. "I need someone who can help advance my career, not hold it back. Someone who's comfortable at corporate social events, who can hold her own in conversations with influential people, who understands the importance of image and positioning in professional success." Each word felt like a physical blow. "And you don't think I can do those things?" "Honestly, no." His bluntness was devastating in its simplicity. "You're smart, Jess, and you work hard, but you don't understand that world. You're more comfortable talking about daily specials than investment strategies. You'd rather spend time with the kitchen staff than network with potential clients. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what I need in a partner." The irony of his criticism wasn't lost on me. The qualities he was dismissing, my ability to connect with all kinds of people, my understanding of service and hospitality, my skill at making others feel comfortable and valued, were exactly the qualities that would make someone an asset in business networking. But Ryan couldn't see past the uniform and the setting to recognize the transferable skills I'd developed. "So, what are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "I think we should separate," Ryan said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing a minor schedule change. "I'll find another place to stay and we can figure out the divorce details later. This doesn't have to be hostile or complicated. We're just two people who want different things out of life." The casualness of his proposal was almost more hurtful than the decision itself. 3 years of marriage dismissed as a simple incompatibility, as if our relationship had been a business partnership that wasn't generating sufficient returns on investment. That night, after Ryan packed a suitcase and left for what he said would be a few days at a hotel while he looked for an apartment, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of the life we'd built together. The coffee maker we'd bought for our first apartment, the small dining table where we'd shared hundreds of meals, the bulletin board covered with photos from happier times. But instead of falling apart, something unexpected happened. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The constant tension I'd been carrying, the feeling that I was somehow failing to meet expectations I didn't fully understand, began to lift. I realized that I'd been trying so hard to be the person Ryan wanted me to be that I'd lost sight of who I actually was and what I was capable of achieving. I pulled out the notebooks where I'd been recording my business observations and started writing with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Not just recording what I'd learned, but planning what I wanted to build. Ryan had made it clear that he didn't believe in my potential, but Helen Chang's words echoed in my mind. I wasn't just serving food, I was studying how to make people happy, how to create experiences they'd remember. Over the next several days, as Ryan collected more of his belongings and made arrangements to sublet an apartment across town, I found myself energized in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant undercurrent of tension and criticism, I could think clearly about my future for the first time in months. Helen noticed the change immediately. "You look different," she said one morning as I was setting up my section for the breakfast shift. Lighter somehow. I told her about Ryan's decision to separate, expecting sympathy or expressions of concern about my future. Instead, Helen nodded as if she'd been expecting this news. "Good," she said simply. "Now you can stop trying to be what someone else thinks you should be and start becoming what you're meant to be." Her response surprised me. "Good? My marriage is falling apart." Helen looked at me with the kind of direct honesty that had made her a successful business owner. "Jess, for the past year, I've watched you shrink. You stopped talking about your business plans, stopped taking initiative during shifts, stopped believing in yourself. That's not the woman I hired, and it's definitely not the woman who's going to build her own empire." Helen's words forced me to confront how much I'd changed during my marriage. How much of myself I'd given up trying to fit into Ryan's vision of what a supportive wife should be. I realized that I'd been so focused on not embarrassing him that I'd stopped pursuing the goals that had originally attracted him to me. That realization became the foundation for everything that would follow. Ryan had left me because he thought I'd never amount to more than a small-town waitress with unrealistic dreams. But what he'd actually done was free me to prove him wrong, in ways he could never imagine. The next morning, I called the Small Business Administration office in Austin and scheduled an appointment to discuss loan options for new entrepreneurs. I had $40,000 saved, a detailed business plan that I'd been refining for 2 years, and for the first time in months, the absolute certainty that I was capable of building something extraordinary. What Ryan didn't know was that his dismissal had lit a fire under me that all his encouragement had never managed to ignite. Sometimes the best motivation comes not from people who believe in you, but from people who underestimate you so completely that proving them wrong becomes your driving obsession. Within a week of our separation, I had meetings scheduled with 3 potential investors, a consultation with a business attorney about incorporation procedures, and a list of potential clients who'd expressed interest in catering services. Helen had offered to let me use the diner's kitchen during off hours to test recipes and prepare sample menus, and I'd started networking with event planners and wedding coordinators throughout Austin. I was no longer the woman who'd been apologizing for her ambitions and trying to minimize her dreams to avoid making her husband uncomfortable. I was Jessica Martinez, entrepreneur in the making, and Ryan Thompson was about to discover that leaving me was the biggest mistake of his professional life. 2 weeks after Ryan walked out, I found myself sitting across from Amanda Chen, one of Austin's most respected divorce attorneys, in her downtown office overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Amanda was Helen's niece, a sharp woman in her mid-30s who'd built her practice representing women navigating complex divorces, particularly those involving significant assets or business interests. "So, let me understand this correctly," Amanda said, reviewing the notes I'd provided about my marriage and separation. "Your husband left you because he thought you lacked ambition and would never amount to anything more than a waitress. But you've actually been building a substantial savings account and developing a comprehensive business plan for the past 2 years." "That's right," I confirmed, sliding a folder across her desk. "I've got $43,000 in a separate savings account that Ryan doesn't know about, plus detailed market research and financial projections for a catering business I want to launch." Amanda flipped through my business plan, her expression shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise. "This is incredibly thorough, Jessica. Revenue projections, competitor analysis, target market identification, even preliminary vendor relationships. This isn't the work of someone without ambition." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Ryan had been dismissing my potential, I'd been quietly building the foundation for a business that could be far more successful than he'd ever imagined. "Ryan never asked to see any of this," I explained. "He assumed that because I worked at a diner, I couldn't possibly be planning anything more sophisticated." "Men like your husband often make that mistake," Amanda said, closing the folder. "They equate current circumstances with permanent potential. In my experience, that kind of underestimation usually comes back to bite them." She leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "What are your goals for this divorce, beyond the obvious legal dissolution?" I'd been thinking about that question since the day Ryan left. "I want a clean break with no ongoing financial entanglements. I don't want alimony or support payments. I want to prove that I can build something successful entirely on my own." Amanda nodded approvingly. "That's a smart approach, especially if you're planning to launch a business. Avoiding ongoing financial connections will give you complete freedom to make decisions without his input or interference." She paused, then added, "Though I should mention that given the length of your marriage and the fact that you both contributed to household expenses, you might be entitled to a portion of his retirement savings or other assets." "I don't want anything from him," I said firmly. "I want him to know that everything I accomplish going forward was built without his help or his money." Amanda smiled, the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen this determination before and knew it usually led to remarkable outcomes. "Then let's make sure this divorce is processed as quickly and cleanly as possible so you can get on with building your empire." We spent the next hour reviewing Texas divorce law, discussing timelines and procedures, and establishing a strategy that would minimize complications while protecting my interests. Amanda explained that since we had no children, minimal shared assets, and I was requesting no spousal support, the process could be completed in as little as 60 days once Ryan was served with papers. "One question," Amanda said as our meeting was wrapping up. "Do you know if Ryan is seeing someone else? It might affect the timeline or complexity of the proceedings." I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I suspect he might be, though I don't have proof. He's been working late more frequently, attending more social events, and there's been a woman mentioned several times in his conversations about work. Victoria Sterling, the daughter of one of his firm's major clients." Amanda made a note in my file. "If he is involved with someone else, especially someone from his professional circle, it might actually work in our favor. Men in his situation often want to move quickly to avoid complications with their new relationships." Leaving Amanda's office, I felt a sense of momentum that had been missing from my life for months. Having a clear legal strategy and timeline gave me something concrete to work toward, a deadline that would mark the official end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The next morning at the diner, Helen pulled me aside during the brief lull between breakfast and lunch rushes. "You look like someone with a plan," she observed, refilling my coffee cup as we sat at the counter. I met with the attorney yesterday, I told her. And I've got meetings scheduled with 2 potential investors next week about the catering business. Helen nodded approvingly. Good. And what about the other situation? I looked at her questioningly, and she continued. Your husband's new girlfriend. You know about her, right? My stomach tightened. I suspected something, but I don't have proof. Helen pulled out her phone and showed me a photo that someone had tagged on social media. Ryan and a stunning blonde woman at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, sitting close together, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that was definitely not professional. Victoria Sterling, Helen said matter-of-factly. Daughter of David Sterling, who owns Sterling & Associates Legal Group. My friend Maria works catering for their events, and she says this has been going on for at least 2 months. The confirmation stung, but not as much as I'd expected. If anything, it validated my decision to move forward with the divorce quickly and decisively. How long have you known? I asked. I suspected something when you started looking sad all the time, Helen admitted. But I got confirmation last week. When Maria mentioned seeing them together at multiple events, I wasn't sure if I should tell you. I squeezed her hand gratefully. I'm glad you did. It makes this easier, actually. No wondering what if. No second guessing whether we could have worked things out. Helen studied my face carefully. You're not heartbroken. It was a statement, not a question, and I realized she was right. I'm angry, I admitted, and hurt that he was dishonest about it. But heartbroken? No. I think I've been mourning this marriage for months without realizing. Good, Helen said with characteristic directness. Heartbreak would slow you down, and you've got work to do. She was right. Over the next several days, I threw myself into business development with the kind of focused energy I hadn't felt in years. My first investor meeting was with Marcus Rivera, a local entrepreneur who'd built a successful food truck empire before moving into restaurant development. Marcus was someone I'd met through my business classes, and he'd expressed interest in my catering concept when I'd mentioned it, during a group project. We met at a coffee shop in South Austin, and I presented my business plan with a confidence that surprised even me. I'd rehearsed every detail, anticipated potential questions, and prepared financial projections that demonstrated both ambition and realistic expectations. This is impressive work, Jessica, Marcus said after reviewing my materials. Your market analysis is particularly strong. You clearly understand both the service side and the business side of hospitality. I've been studying both for years, I explained. Working in restaurants has given me insights into operations and customer psychology that I couldn't have learned any other way. Marcus nodded. That's exactly the kind of practical experience that makes the difference between businesses that succeed and ones that fail. Too many people try to enter the food service industry based on theoretical knowledge alone. We discussed the specifics of my business model, which focused on high-quality, personalized catering for mid-range events. Weddings, corporate functions, anniversary parties, and graduation celebrations. My target market was families and organizations that wanted something more sophisticated than basic catering, but couldn't afford the premium prices charged by the city's most exclusive caterers. The sweet spot, Marcus agreed. There's definitely demand in that market segment, and your pricing structure looks competitive without undercutting your profitability. By the end of our meeting, Marcus had committed to investing $15,000 in exchange for a small equity stake and the right to provide business mentorship during the startup phase. More importantly, he'd offered to introduce me to his network of event planners, venue managers, and potential corporate clients. My second investor meeting was even more promising. Sarah Kim was a wedding planner who'd built one of Austin's most successful event planning businesses over the past decade. She understood the catering industry from the client side and had been looking for reliable partners who could provide consistent quality at reasonable prices. "I get requests constantly for catering recommendations," Sarah explained during our lunch meeting at a trendy restaurant in downtown Austin. "Most of my clients want something more personal than the big corporate caterers can provide, but they also want reliability and professionalism. Based on your plan and your background, I think you could fill that niche perfectly." Sarah's investment was smaller than Marcus's, but she offered something equally valuable: a guaranteed stream of referrals and the opportunity to cater several events she had planned for the upcoming wedding season. "If you can handle these initial events successfully," she said, "I'll make you my preferred catering partner for clients in your price range." Within 2 weeks of my divorce attorney meeting, I had secured $25,000 in startup, investment, and commitments for my first 4 catering jobs. The momentum was building faster than I'd anticipated, and I found myself working late into the night developing menus, researching suppliers, and designing marketing materials. Helen had been true to her word about letting me use the diner's kitchen during off hours. After the dinner service ended and the staff finished cleaning, I'd stay to experiment with recipes, test portion sizes, and practice the kind of sophisticated food presentation that would set my catering apart from basic buffet services. Tony Rossetti, the head chef at one of Austin's upscale restaurants, had heard about my venture through the culinary community's informal network and offered to collaborate on menu development. Tony was a classically trained chef who'd grown tired of the ego-driven atmosphere at high-end restaurants and was looking for opportunities to do more creative, personal work. "Your concept is smart," he told me one evening as we worked together in the diner's kitchen, developing a signature appetizer that would become one of my most popular offerings. Most caterers focus either on quantity or presentation, but rarely both. If you can deliver restaurant-quality food with reliable service at reasonable prices, you'll have more business than you can handle. Tony's expertise elevated my food to a level that I couldn't have achieved on my own, while my understanding of service and customer relations ensured that the overall experience would exceed expectations. We developed a core menu of 24 items that could be mixed and matched to create customized offerings for different types of events and budgets. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly. Ryan had been served with papers at his office, and according to Amanda, he'd seemed almost relieved to receive them. He'd quickly agreed to all my terms, including the waiver of spousal support and the division of our minimal shared assets. "He's eager to get this finalized," Amanda reported during one of our phone conversations. "My guess is that he wants to move forward with his new relationship without the complication of an ongoing divorce." The speed of Ryan's agreement confirmed what I'd suspected about his relationship with Victoria. If he was planning to propose to her, he'd need to be officially divorced first. The timeline worked perfectly for my purposes as well. I wanted to be legally free to focus entirely on building my business without any lingering connections to my past. 6 weeks after Ryan had walked out of our marriage, I was ready to launch Capital City Catering. I'd secured all the necessary permits and licenses, established relationships with reliable suppliers, hired 3 part-time staff members with restaurant experience, and booked my first major event, a 150-person corporate anniversary celebration for a local technology company. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening in May, and I'd spent weeks planning every detail. The menu featured Tony's signature appetizers alongside more traditional options, with vegetarian and gluten-free alternatives that reflected current dietary trends. I'd rented professional-grade serving equipment and coordinated with the venue's event staff to ensure seamless service. The morning of the event, I woke up with a mixture of excitement and terror that I'd never experienced before. This was the moment when all my planning, saving, and dreaming would be put to the test in front of real customers with real expectations. Helen arrived at the diner early to help me load supplies into the catering van I'd rented for the occasion. "Nervous?" she asked as we carefully packed trays of prepared appetizers into insulated containers. Terrified, I admitted. What if I've overestimated my abilities? What if the food isn't good enough, or the service is disorganized, or I've forgotten something crucial? Helen stopped packing and looked at me directly. Jess, I've watched you handle everything from wedding receptions for 200 people to last-minute catering requests with no advance notice. You've been doing this work for years. The only difference now is that your name is on the business. She was right, but that difference felt enormous. At the diner, mistakes could be corrected quickly, and the informal atmosphere meant that small imperfections were easily forgiven. Corporate catering required a different level of precision and professionalism. Tony met us at the venue 2 hours before the event was scheduled to begin, and we spent the afternoon setting up our service station, arranging food displays, and coordinating with the venue's audiovisual team. My part-time staff arrived an hour before guests were expected, and we ran through our service plan one final time. As the first guests began arriving, I took a deep breath and stepped into my role as the owner and operator of Capital City Catering. For the next 4 hours, I coordinated between the kitchen and the serving staff, ensured that food was replenished promptly, and personally greeted several key clients who Sarah had introduced me to as potential future customers. The event was a complete success. Guests complimented the food quality and presentation. The service ran smoothly without any major complications, and the corporate client was so pleased that they booked me for their holiday party on the spot. More importantly, 3 other attendees approached me about catering their own upcoming events. As we cleaned up that evening, Tony clapped me on the shoulder with the kind of respect that has to be earned. You did it, Jess. That was professional level catering from start to finish. Marcus, who'd attended the event as my guest, was equally impressed. I've seen a lot of new businesses struggle with their first major event, but you handled that like you've been doing it for years. Driving home that night, exhausted but exhilarated, I realized that I'd crossed a threshold. I was no longer someone planning to start a business. I was someone who had started a business and proven it could succeed. The next morning brought a surprise that would accelerate my timeline considerably. Sarah called to tell me that one of Austin's most prominent families had contacted her about catering their daughter's engagement party, a 300-person event scheduled for early June. The Sterling family, Sarah explained. David Sterling's daughter Victoria is getting engaged, and they want to host a celebration at their estate in Westlake Hills. The budget is substantial, and they're looking for a caterer who can handle upscale service for a sophisticated guest list. My heart stopped. Victoria Sterling. Ryan's new girlfriend was getting engaged, presumably to someone with the social status and financial resources that Ryan aspired to achieve. The irony was, perfect. She was hiring me to cater her engagement party without having any idea who I was. "Are you interested?" Sarah asked. "It would be a huge opportunity for your business. The Sterling family is connected to everyone who matters in Austin society. If you can impress them, you'll have more high-end clients than you can handle." I took a deep breath, considering the implications. Catering Victoria Sterling's engagement party would be both the biggest professional opportunity I'd ever had and the most personally complicated situation I could imagine. If Ryan was at the party, which he almost certainly would be, it would be our first face-to-face encounter since our separation. But the business opportunity was too significant to pass up, and part of me relished the poetic justice of the situation. Ryan had left me because he thought I'd never amount to anything more than a waitress. Now I'd be catering his new girlfriend's engagement party as the owner of a successful business. "Yes," I told Sarah without hesitation. "I'm very interested." "Excellent," Sarah replied. "I'll set up a meeting with Victoria and her mother for next week. This could be the event that establishes your reputation in Austin's society circles." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help smiling at the unexpected turn my life had taken. 2 months ago, I'd been the wife of a man who was ashamed of my lack of ambition. Now I was about to cater the engagement party of his new girlfriend. demonstrating exactly the kind of success he'd thought I was incapable of achieving. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. And I was about to prove that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. It's getting successful enough that your detractors have to pay you for the privilege of witnessing your triumph. The Sterling estate in Westlake Hills was everything I'd expected and more. Rolling lawns that could have been featured in architectural, magazines, a main house that looked like something from a European castle, and gardens that clearly required a full-time staff to maintain. As I drove through the electronic gates for my consultation meeting with Victoria and her mother, I couldn't help thinking about how different this world was from the modest apartment Ryan and I had shared just months earlier. Patricia Sterling met me at the front door, a woman in her late 50s whose perfectly styled silver hair and understated designer clothing spoke of old money and refined taste. She greeted me with the kind of polished warmth that wealthy people perfect for dealing with service providers, friendly but maintaining clear boundaries about social position. "Jessica, so lovely to meet you," she said, leading me through a foyer with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "Sarah has told us wonderful things about your work. Victoria is very excited to discuss the engagement celebration." Victoria. Sterling was waiting in what the family apparently called the morning room, a sunlit space overlooking the estate's swimming pool and tennis court. She was even more beautiful in person than in the social media photos I'd glimpsed, with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from never having to worry about money or social acceptance. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, and she wore a simple but expensive sundress that probably cost more than I made in tips during a good week at the diner. "Jessica," Victoria said, rising to shake my hand. "I'm so pleased you're available for our celebration. Sarah says you're the most talented caterer she's worked with." I accepted the compliment gracefully while studying Victoria's face for any signs that she might recognize my name or connect me to Ryan. But her expression remained politely interested, with no indication that she'd ever heard of Jessica Martinez, in any context other than catering. We spent the next hour discussing the engagement party details. The event would celebrate Victoria's engagement to Harrison Mitchell, the son of a prominent Dallas banking family. 300 guests, including Austin's social elite, business leaders, and political figures. The celebration would be held in the estate's formal gardens, with cocktails on the terrace and dinner under a specially constructed tent. "We want something sophisticated but not pretentious," Victoria explained as we walked through the gardens where the event would take place. "Elegant comfort food, if that makes sense. The kind of menu that will impress our guests but also feel warm and welcoming." Her description aligned perfectly with the style I'd been developing for capital city catering. High-quality ingredients prepared with restaurant-level technique, but presented in ways that felt approachable rather than intimidating. I could see immediately how to create a menu that would showcase my skills while fitting the tone they wanted to achieve. Patricia Sterling was more focused on the logistics and presentation. "We'll have photographers from Austin Monthly and Texas Living magazines covering the event," she explained. "Everything needs to look absolutely perfect for the pictures." The pressure was significant, but so was the opportunity. This single event could establish my reputation among Austin's wealthiest families and generate enough referrals to sustain my business for years. I quoted them a price that reflected both the scale of the event and the potential value to my company, expecting some negotiation. Instead, Victoria simply nodded. "That sounds very reasonable. When do you need a deposit? To secure the date?" The ease with which they accepted my pricing reminded me of the vast gulf between their world and mine. What represented a substantial investment for my business was a minor expense for their family. But that disparity also represented opportunity. If I could consistently deliver exceptional service to clients at this level, my business could grow far beyond what I'd originally imagined. As we concluded the meeting, Victoria mentioned something that made my heart race. "Harrison and I are planning to have a small dinner party at my apartment next Friday, to introduce him to some of my local friends. Would you be available to cater? That as well? Nothing elaborate? Maybe for 12 people? I managed to keep my voice steady as I agreed, but internally I was calculating the implications. Ryan would almost certainly be at that dinner party, which meant our first face-to-face encounter since the separation would happen while I was working as Victoria's caterer. The dramatic irony was almost too perfect to be real. That evening, I called Amanda to update her on this unexpected development. "So let me understand this correctly," she said, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. "Your husband left you for a woman who's now hiring you to cater her social events?" "It gets better," I told her. "The dinner party is for 12 people, which means Ryan will be there while I'm serving food. He'll see exactly what I've built while he's been playing house with his new girlfriend." Amanda was quiet for a moment, then said, "Jessica, this could actually work in our favor for the divorce proceedings. If Ryan sees how successful you've become, it reinforces our position that you don't need spousal support and that the marriage dissolution should be straightforward." She was right, but the personal satisfaction mattered more to me than the legal implications. Ryan had dismissed my potential and walked out on our marriage because he thought I'd never amount to anything significant. Now he'd witness firsthand exactly how wrong he'd been about my capabilities. The week leading up to Victoria's dinner party was a whirlwind of preparation. I worked with Tony to develop a menu that would showcase our skills while remaining elegant and understated. Pan-seared salmon with herb butter, roasted vegetable medley, wild rice pilaf, and a selection of artisanal appetizers that could be served during cocktails. Helen watched my preparations with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen many dramatic confrontations over the years. "You know he's going to be shocked," she said, as I practiced plating techniques in the diner's kitchen after hours. "Good," I replied, arranging microgreens on a salmon fillet with the kind of precision I'd learned from Tony. "Shock is exactly what I'm going for." "And after the shock? What then?" Helen asked perceptively. I paused, considering her question. What did I want from this encounter beyond the immediate satisfaction of proving Ryan wrong? "I want him to understand what he gave up," I said finally. "I want him to see that his judgment was completely off, that he walked away from someone who was building something extraordinary." Helen nodded approvingly. "Just remember that you're not doing this for him anymore. You're doing it for you, for your business, for your future. Don't let his presence distract you from the professional opportunity." She was absolutely right. Regardless of the personal dynamics, this dinner party was a crucial business opportunity. Victoria's friends represented potential clients, and the connections I could make during one evening might generate referrals for months to come. Friday evening arrived with perfect spring weather. I loaded my supplies into the catering van and drove to Victoria's apartment building, a luxury high-rise in downtown Austin with concierge service and views of Lady Bird Lake. Victoria had given me detailed instructions about service expectations and timing, and I'd coordinated with the building staff about loading equipment and accessing the service elevator. Victoria's apartment was a showcase of contemporary design and expensive taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and the open-plan living space was decorated with modern art and designer furniture. The kitchen was a chef's dream, with professional-grade appliances and granite countertops that provided ample workspace for food preparation. I arrived 2 hours before the guests were expected, giving myself time to set up serving stations, prepare appetizers, and arrange the dining area according to Victoria's specifications. She'd hired a bartender separately, so my responsibility was entirely focused on food service and presentation. Victoria greeted me warmly when she returned from having her hair styled for the evening. "Everything looks wonderful, Jessica. I'm so excited for my friends to taste your food." She was dressed in a stunning black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. Looking at her, I could understand what had attracted Ryan. Victoria Sterling represented everything he'd thought he wanted: beauty, wealth, social connections, and the kind of effortless sophistication that came from never having to question your place in the world. But I also noticed things about Victoria that Ryan might not have appreciated fully. She spoke to me with genuine respect, asking intelligent questions about food preparation and showing real interest in the catering process. When she tasted one of the appetizers I'd prepared, her compliment was specific and thoughtful rather than generic praise. "This flavor combination is brilliant," she said, trying the goat cheese and fig appetizer that had become one of my signature offerings. "The sweetness of the figs balances perfectly with the herbs. Where did you learn to cook like this?" I explained my background working in restaurants and my collaboration with Tony, and Victoria listened with the kind of attention that suggested she valued culinary skill regardless of formal training. Whatever her other qualities, she wasn't the shallow social climber I'd imagined Ryan's new girlfriend might be. At 7:30, guests began arriving. I watched from the kitchen as Victoria and Harrison greeted their friends, a collection of young professionals who represented Austin's rising social class: lawyers, business executives, real estate developers, and tech entrepreneurs, all dressed in the kind of understated luxury that signaled success without being ostentatious. And then Ryan walked through the door. He looked exactly the same, but somehow completely different. His hair was styled more expensively, his suit was clearly custom-tailored, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd found his place in the social hierarchy he'd always aspired to join. But when he scanned the room and his eyes landed on me in the kitchen, his expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment. I continued preparing appetizers as if nothing had happened, though my heart was racing. Ryan said something to Victoria that I couldn't hear, and she glanced toward the kitchen with a puzzled expression. Then Harrison was introducing Ryan to other guests, and the moment passed without immediate confrontation. For the next hour, I served appetizers and ensured that drinks were flowing smoothly while Ryan mingled with the other guests. I could feel him watching me occasionally, but he made no attempt to approach the kitchen or acknowledge our connection. Part of me was disappointed that he didn't seem more shocked by my presence, but I reminded myself that the evening was just beginning. During dinner service, the impact of my work became more apparent. The guests were effusive in their praise for the food, with several asking Victoria for my business card. I heard fragments of conversation from the dining room as I coordinated courses and managed timing. "This salmon is incredible, Victoria. Where did you find this caterer?" "The presentation is restaurant quality. I'm definitely calling her for our anniversary party." "You have to give me her contact information. We're planning our daughter's graduation celebration." Each compliment felt like a small victory, validation that my food and service could compete at the highest levels of Austin's social scene. But the real moment of triumph came during dessert service, when I overheard a conversation that made everything worthwhile. Harrison was talking to Ryan about business opportunities, and Ryan mentioned that he was recently divorced and looking to establish himself more independently from his previous life. "Smart move," Harrison replied. "Victoria told me about your ex-wife. Apparently she was just a waitress or something? You're definitely better off with someone who can contribute to your professional growth." I held my breath, waiting for Ryan's response. This was his opportunity to correct the record, to acknowledge that he'd been wrong about my potential, or at least to show some awareness of what I'd accomplished. Instead, Ryan simply nodded. "Exactly. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions about compatibility and long-term goals." The casual dismissal stung more than I'd expected. Here I was, catering an elegant dinner party for Austin's social elite, demonstrating exactly the kind of sophisticated service and business acumen that Ryan claimed I lacked, and he was still characterizing me as just a waitress to his new friends. But that dismissal also crystallized my resolve. Ryan's inability to see beyond his own prejudices was his limitation, not mine. The guests at this dinner party were already recognizing my value and booking my services for their own events. His opinion mattered far less than their business. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, I focused on cleaning up efficiently and professionally. Victoria sought me out in the kitchen as I was packing the last of my equipment. "Jessica, thank you so much. The dinner was absolutely perfect, and my friends are already asking for your information." She handed me an envelope with my payment, plus a generous tip. "I hope you'll be available for the engagement party next month. After tonight, I'm even more confident that you're exactly what we need." I thanked her sincerely, genuinely appreciating both her business and her respectful treatment throughout the evening. As I was preparing to leave, Ryan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Jess," he said quietly, using the nickname he'd always called me. "I didn't expect to see you here." I looked at him calmly, noting the discomfort in his expression. "I'm catering Victoria's events. It's my business." "Your business?" He seemed confused. "I thought you were still working at the diner." "I launched Capital City Catering 2 months ago," I explained matter-of-factly. "Tonight was actually my 7th event this month." Ryan stared at me as if I'd announced I was planning to colonize Mars. "You started a catering company?" The disbelief in his voice would have been insulting if it weren't so perfectly predictable. "Yes, Ryan. I started a catering company. I have investors, clients, and a waiting list for bookings through the summer." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently struggling to process this information. Finally, he said, "That's great, Jess. Really great. I'm happy for you." But his tone suggested he was anything but happy. He seemed almost betrayed, as if my success somehow violated the narrative he'd constructed about our incompatibility. In his version of events, I was supposed to remain exactly as he'd left me, proving that his decision to pursue someone more ambitious had been correct. "I should get going," I said, picking up my equipment cases. "Congratulations on your engagement, by the way. Victoria seems lovely." Ryan stepped aside to let me pass, but I could feel his eyes following me as I made my way to the service elevator. In the reflection of the elevator doors, I caught a glimpse of his expression, and it wasn't the shock or regret I'd been expecting. It was something more complicated, a mixture of confusion and what might have been resentment. Driving home that night, I realized that the evening had been both more and less satisfying than I'd anticipated. Professionally, it had been a complete success. I'd impressed Victoria's friends, secured several new bookings, and demonstrated that my business could handle high-end social events with grace and sophistication. Personally, the encounter with Ryan had been anticlimactic. His inability to acknowledge my success or show any real awareness of how completely he'd misjudged my potential felt almost pathetic rather than vindictive. He wasn't the villain I'd built up in my mind, just a small-minded man who couldn't see beyond his own limited perspective. But that realization was liberating in its own way. I'd been carrying anger and hurt about Ryan's dismissal of my potential, allowing his opinion to matter more than it deserved. Seeing him tonight, watching him struggle to process the evidence of my success, made me understand that his judgment had never been worth my concern. The real victory wasn't proving Ryan wrong. It was proving myself right. I'd believed in my potential when no one else did, worked toward my goals when they seemed impossible, and built something meaningful from nothing but determination and skill. Amanda called me the next morning to check in about the evening. "How did it go? Ryan seemed surprised to see you." "Surprised? Confused? Maybe a little threatened," I reported. But honestly, it mattered less than I thought it would. The business success felt more important than his reaction. "Good," Amanda said approvingly. "That's exactly the right perspective. By the way, I have news about the divorce. Ryan's attorney called yesterday. He wants to expedite the final hearing. Apparently, there's some urgency on his side." I thought about Victoria's engagement party, scheduled for early June. He probably wants to be officially divorced before then. Probably, Amanda agreed, which works perfectly for our timeline. We can have everything finalized within the next 2 weeks if you're ready to proceed. I was ready. More than ready. The legal dissolution of my marriage to Ryan felt like the final step in a transformation that had been months in the making. Soon, I'd be Jessica Martinez, successful entrepreneur and business owner, with no legal ties to the man who'd once dismissed my dreams as unrealistic. The irony was perfect. By the time Ryan married Victoria Sterling in what would undoubtedly be Austin's social event of the year, I'd be a divorced woman running a thriving catering business. And if the universe continued to demonstrate its sense of humor, I might even be working that wedding. The thought made me smile as I headed to the diner for what would be one of my last regular shifts. Helen had already agreed to let me reduce my hours as my catering business grew, and soon I'd be working at Sunrise Diner only part-time, more to maintain my connection to the community than from financial necessity. My transformation from underestimated wife to successful entrepreneur was almost complete. All that remained was the final confrontation, the moment when Ryan would have to acknowledge that everything he'd believed about my limitations had been completely wrong. I had a feeling that moment would come sooner than either of us expected. The next 3 weeks transformed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Word about Victoria's dinner party spread through Austin's social networks, with the efficiency that only comes from genuinely impressed guests talking to their equally wealthy friends. My phone rang constantly with booking requests, corporate catering inquiries, and consultation appointments for elaborate celebrations that would have seemed impossibly sophisticated just months earlier. Marcus had been right about the avalanche effect of success in the catering industry. One spectacular event led to 3 referrals, which led to 9 more inquiries, which led to a waiting list that stretched through the end of summer. Within 2 weeks of Victoria's dinner party, I'd hired 2 additional full-time staff members and was negotiating a lease on a commercial kitchen space that would allow me to handle multiple large events simultaneously. The divorce finalization happened on a Thursday morning in late May in a sterile courthouse conference room that felt surreal after the emotional intensity of the preceding months. Ryan sat across the table with his attorney, signing documents with the business-like efficiency he'd always applied to transactions he wanted to complete quickly. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and speaking only when legally required, to confirm his agreement to the terms. Amanda had prepared me for the possibility that Ryan might contest some aspects of the settlement at the last minute, but he signed everything without objection. No request for spousal support, no claims on my business assets, no attempt to delay the proceedings. He seemed eager to conclude our legal relationship as expeditiously as possible. "Congratulations," Amanda said as we left the courthouse. "You're officially a free woman with a thriving business and no financial obligations to anyone but yourself." Standing on the courthouse steps in the warm Texas sunshine, I felt a sense of completion that was both satisfying and slightly melancholy. 3 years of marriage dissolved in 45 minutes of paperwork and signatures. But the melancholy was overwhelmed by excitement about the future I was building entirely on my own terms. That afternoon brought a phone call that would accelerate my timeline for confronting Ryan in the most dramatic way possible. Patricia Sterling called personally, rather than having an assistant handle the communication, which immediately signaled the importance of her request. "Jessica, I have a rather unusual situation I hope you can help with," she began, her tone carefully measured. "Victoria and Harrison have decided to move their wedding up significantly. They've found an opening at the venue they prefer, but it means the ceremony will be next Saturday." My heart started racing, but I kept my voice professional. "That's quite short notice, Mrs. Sterling. What kind of catering support are you looking for?" "The reception will be at Westlake Country Club, and they have their own catering staff for the main meal," Patricia explained. "But we're hosting a more intimate welcome gathering at our estate on Friday evening for out-of-town family and the wedding party. About 60 people, cocktails, and heavy hors d'oeuvres. Victoria specifically requested that we hire you for that event. The timing was perfect with an almost cosmic sense of justice. Ryan and Victoria's wedding weekend would feature me as the caterer for their pre-wedding celebration, serving the very people who would witness their vows the following day. It was an opportunity for vindication that was too poetic to refuse. "I'd be honored to cater the welcome event," I told Patricia. "Send me the details, and I'll prepare a proposal for your review." As soon as I hung up, I called Tony to discuss the menu possibilities. This event needed to be absolutely flawless, showcasing not just my catering skills, but my ability to execute sophisticated service under pressure. "This is your moment," Tony said immediately. "We need to create something that will make every guest remember your name." We spent the next 2 days developing a menu that balanced elegance with accessibility, familiar flavors elevated through superior ingredients and presentation. Truffle mac and cheese served in individual ramekins, beef tenderloin sliders with horseradish cream, smoked salmon canapés with dill crème fraîche, and a selection of seasonal vegetable offerings that would appeal to health-conscious guests. The preparation logistics were more complex than anything I'd attempted previously. 60 guests meant scaling up my usual quantities while maintaining the quality and presentation standards that had earned my reputation. I arranged to rent additional equipment, hired 3 extra servers for the evening, and blocked out 2 full days for advanced preparation. Helen watched my planning process with amusement and admiration. "You realize you're orchestrating the most expensive revenge in Austin's social history," she observed as I finalized supplier orders at the diner during a quiet afternoon. "It's not revenge," I corrected her. "It's just good business, though I admit the timing is satisfying." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Jessica, you're catering your ex-husband's wedding weekend. If that's not revenge, it's at least the universe's idea of poetic justice." She was right, but I genuinely moved beyond thinking about Ryan's reaction as my primary motivation. The Sterling family represented the kind of clients who could sustain my business at the highest levels for years to come. Impressing their guests would generate referrals that could establish Capital City Catering as Austin's premier boutique catering service. The week of preparation flew by in a blur of supply coordination, staff training, and menu testing. I'd converted Helen's diner kitchen into a temporary production facility during off hours, preparing components that could be finished on site, and developing a timeline that would ensure everything was ready perfectly on schedule. 2 days before the event, Sarah called with news that added another layer of complexity to the situation. "I thought you should know," she said. "Victoria asked me to coordinate with you about the evening timeline. Apparently, the welcome party is also serving as Ryan's bachelor celebration, since they didn't have time to plan separate events." The information hit me like a physical blow. Not only would I be catering Ryan's pre-wedding party, but I'd be serving the very gathering where he celebrated his impending marriage to the woman he'd left me for. The symbolic weight was almost overwhelming. "Are you okay with that?" Sarah asked, clearly concerned about my reaction. I took a deep breath, considering my options. Backing out now would damage my relationship with the Sterling family and potentially harm my reputation in Austin's society circles. But proceeding meant enduring what would probably be the most emotionally challenging professional event of my career. "I'm fine," I told Sarah, and realized I meant it. "This is business, and I'm a professional." The day of the welcome party arrived with perfect weather and my team functioning like a well-rehearsed orchestra. We arrived at the Sterling estate 3 hours before guests were expected, transforming their pool area and gardens into an elegant cocktail setting with food stations, bars, and seating areas that encouraged mingling and conversation. Victoria had chosen a French garden party theme with white linens, abundant flowers, and string lights that would create a magical atmosphere as evening fell. My food stations complemented the aesthetic perfectly, with elegant serving pieces and presentation that looked effortless while requiring meticulous attention to detail. Patricia Sterling supervised our setup with the kind of involved oversight that wealthy clients often applied to important events. She tested every appetizer, reviewed the placement of serving stations, and asked detailed questions about timing and service protocols. Her standards were high, but her feedback was constructive and respectful. "This looks absolutely magnificent, Jessica," she said as we completed the final preparations. "Victoria was right to insist on hiring you. This level of quality is exactly what our family expects." As guests began arriving at 6 o'clock, I positioned myself strategically in the catering station where I could coordinate service while observing the party dynamics. The guest list represented Austin's social elite, with many faces I recognized from society pages and business publications. These were the kind of people whose approval could make or break a luxury service business. Ryan arrived with the rest of the wedding party, looking more confident and socially comfortable than I'd ever seen him during our marriage. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blazer and moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd found his place in the social hierarchy he'd always aspired to join. But when his eyes met mine across the crowded pool area, I saw a flash of something that might have been panic. For just a moment, his composed facade slipped, and I could see the man who'd been shocked to discover his ex-wife catering his new girlfriend's dinner party just weeks earlier. He recovered quickly, turning back to his conversation with Harrison and the other groomsmen, but I noticed that he positioned himself to avoid the areas where I was working throughout the evening. Whether from embarrassment, discomfort, or simple desire to avoid complications, Ryan seemed determined to pretend I wasn't present. The party was a resounding success from every professional perspective. Guests complimented the food enthusiastically, with several approaching me directly to book catering for their own upcoming events. Victoria's aunts from Dallas were particularly impressed, asking for my business cards and discussing potential events at their own homes. More importantly, I overheard conversations that validated everything I'd been working toward. Patricia Sterling told a group of her friends that I was the most professional caterer we've ever worked with, while Victoria's college roommates discussed how I'd elevated cocktail party food to an art form. Each compliment felt like vindication, proof that my skills and vision could compete at the highest levels of Austin's social scene. Whatever Ryan had thought about my limitations, the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The evening's most satisfying moment came during toasts for the happy couple. Harrison's father spoke about the importance of choosing a life partner who would support your growth and ambitions, while Victoria's maid of honor praised her for finding someone who appreciated her intelligence and drive. As the toasts continued, I caught Ryan's eye across the crowd. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at me, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not shock or confusion, but what looked like regret. Not romantic regret, but the kind of recognition that comes from realizing you've made a fundamental error in judgment. Here I was, successfully catering his engagement party, demonstrating exactly the kind of sophistication and business acumen he'd claimed I lacked. The guests were praising my work, booking my services, and treating me with the professional respect he'd thought I'd never earn. Everything he'd believed about my limitations was being contradicted by the evidence of his own eyes. But the moment passed quickly, and Ryan returned his attention to the celebration, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined the flicker of acknowledgement in his expression. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Victoria sought me out to express her gratitude. "Jessica, you've exceeded every expectation. This evening was absolutely perfect, and I've received so many compliments about the food and service." She handed me an envelope with payment, and what I discovered later was an extremely generous tip. "I hope you know how much this means to our family. You've made our wedding weekend truly special." The genuine warmth in her thanks made me realize something unexpected about Victoria Sterling. Despite the wealth and social position that had initially intimidated me, she was gracious, appreciative, and genuinely kind. She treated service providers with respect and seemed to value quality work regardless of the provider's background. In different circumstances, Victoria and I might have been friends. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ryan had chosen a woman whose character and values were actually quite similar to mine, but whose social position allowed him to feel proud rather than embarrassed about their relationship. As my team cleaned up and packed equipment, Patricia Sterling approached me with an unexpected request. "Jessica, I know this is short notice, but would you be available to cater our annual charity gala in October? It's our family's signature fundraising event, and after tonight, I can't imagine trusting it to anyone else." The invitation represented more than just another booking. The Sterling family's annual gala was one of Austin's most prestigious social events, the kind of occasion that could establish my business among the city's wealthiest families permanently. Accepting would mean that within a year of my divorce, I'd become the preferred caterer for the very social circle that Ryan had thought I could never access. "I'd be honored," I told Patricia, and we agreed to meet the following week to discuss details. Driving home that night, exhausted but exhilarated, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. 12 months earlier, I'd been the wife of a man who was ashamed of my work and dismissive of my potential. Now I was an entrepreneur with a thriving business, financial independence, and the professional respect of Austin's social elite. The welcome party had been my final test, and I'd passed with distinction. Tomorrow, Ryan would marry Victoria, Sterling in what would undoubtedly be a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by family and friends who would celebrate their union. But tonight had proven that his decision to leave me had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. I'd built something extraordinary from the foundation of skills and determination he'd failed to recognize. While he'd been climbing social ladders and networking for professional advancement, I'd been developing real expertise and creating authentic value in the marketplace. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that seemed designed for outdoor weddings. Westlake Country Club would host the ceremony and reception, while I would be spending the day handling catering for a corporate event on the other side of town. The symbolism felt appropriate. While Ryan celebrated his new marriage, I'd be working to build the business that had become my primary source of pride and accomplishment. But as I was loading supplies for the corporate event, my phone rang with an unexpected call from Sarah. "Jessica, I have an unusual situation I hope you can help with. The caterer for Victoria and Ryan's wedding reception just canceled due to a family emergency. The country club is scrambling to find replacement coverage with less than 8 hours' notice." My heart stopped. "Are you suggesting that I cater Ryan's wedding?" "The Sterling family specifically requested you," Sarah explained. "After last night's success," Patricia said, "you're the only caterer in Austin she trusts to handle an event this important on such short notice. They're willing to pay triple your usual rate." The offer was professionally incredible and personally overwhelming. Catering Ryan's wedding would be the ultimate vindication, the final proof that everything he'd believed about my limitations had been completely wrong. But it would also mean serving the very ceremony where he promised to love and honor the woman he'd chosen over me. "I'll do it," I heard myself say, surprising even myself with the immediacy of my decision. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "This is going to be emotionally complicated." "I'm sure," I replied, and realized I meant it completely. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, and I'm not going to let personal history interfere with professional success. As I hung up the phone and began reorganizing my day to prepare for the most important catering event of my career, I couldn't help smiling at the perfect irony of the situation. In 6 hours, I'd be serving divorce papers to my ex-husband at his own wedding reception. Sometimes the universe really did have a sense of humor. The next 6 hours were the most intense of my professional life. Coordinating a last-minute wedding reception for 300 guests required every skill I'd developed, and several I had to invent on the spot. My first call was to Tony, who dropped everything to help me redesign the menu for a formal seated dinner rather than cocktail service. "This is insane," he said as we rapidly calculated quantities and adjusted recipes in his restaurant kitchen. "But if we pull this off, you'll be the most talked about caterer in Texas." Marcus arrived with his catering truck and a team of experienced servers who'd worked large events before. Sarah coordinated with the country club's event staff to ensure seamless integration between our services and their venue capabilities. Within 3 hours, we'd assembled a professional operation that could have taken weeks to plan under normal circumstances. The most delicate part of the preparation was psychological rather than logistical. Amanda met me at the country club, an hour before guests were scheduled to arrive, carrying a manila envelope that contained the divorce papers I'd requested that morning. "Are you absolutely certain about this timing?" she asked as we stood in the club's elegant foyer, surrounded by white flowers and crystal chandeliers. Serving divorce papers at someone's wedding reception is going to create quite a scene. I looked around at the opulent setting where Ryan would celebrate his new marriage, thinking about all the times he'd told me I didn't belong in places like this. "I'm certain," I said, accepting the envelope. "The timing is perfect." Amanda studied my expression carefully. "This isn't about revenge anymore, is it?" She was right. Somewhere during the frantic preparation, my motivation had shifted from personal vindication to something larger. This wasn't about hurting Ryan or disrupting his wedding. It was about making a statement that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. "It's about closure," I explained. "Ryan left me because he thought I'd never amount to anything significant. Tonight, he'll watch me successfully cater his wedding reception, then receive legal confirmation that everything he believed about my limitations was wrong." The ceremony itself was beautiful, held in the country club's garden pavilion overlooking Lake Austin. I watched from the catering preparation area as Victoria walked down the aisle in a stunning designer gown, radiant with happiness and surrounded by family and friends who clearly adored her. Ryan looked handsome and confident as he waited at the altar, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than I used to make in 2 months at the diner. When Victoria reached his side and they exchanged vows, I felt a surprising lack of bitterness or regret. They looked genuinely happy together, two people who shared similar backgrounds and aspirations, who could support each other's social and professional goals without the kind of fundamental incompatibility that had undermined my marriage to Ryan. Watching them promise to love and honor each other, I realized that our divorce had probably been the best outcome for everyone involved. As guests moved from the ceremony to cocktail hour, my team sprang into action with the precision of a military operation. We'd arranged elegant past appetizers and signature cocktails that showcased our capabilities while building anticipation for the dinner service to follow. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Guests who'd been skeptical about last-minute catering changes were quickly won over by the quality and presentation of our offerings. I overheard multiple conversations praising the seamless transition and exceptional attention to detail that had saved the reception from potential disaster. Patricia Sterling found me during the cocktail service, her relief and gratitude evident in every word. "Jessica, I cannot thank you enough for stepping in today. You've turned what could have been a catastrophe into an even more special celebration than we'd originally planned." The dinner service was flawless. 3 courses of elegant cuisine served with the kind of precise timing and professional presentation that elevated our operation to the level of Austin's most exclusive restaurants. Tony had outdone himself with a menu that was both sophisticated and accessible, while my service team executed every detail with military precision. As the evening progressed and wine flowed freely, the atmosphere became increasingly celebratory. Guests were laughing, dancing, and thoroughly enjoying themselves in ways that validated every decision I'd made about menu selection and service style. Ryan seemed to be having the time of his life, dancing with Victoria, laughing with his groomsmen, and basking in the attention that comes with being the groom at a lavish social event. He'd glanced in my direction a few times during the evening, but mostly seemed focused on enjoying his wedding celebration. That changed during the dessert course, when I approached his table carrying the divorce papers disguised as a standard catering inquiry form on a silver tray. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," I said in my most professional voice, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I have some final paperwork that requires your signature." Ryan looked up from his conversation with Harrison's father, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Can't this wait until after the reception?" "I'm afraid not," I replied, maintaining my composed demeanor. "These documents are time-sensitive and require immediate attention." Ryan sighed and reached for his pen, probably assuming I needed authorization for additional services or final payment processing. But as he opened the envelope and began reading, his expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to complete shock. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rising slightly as he realized what he was looking at. "Those are your finalized divorce papers," I explained clearly, ensuring that nearby guests could hear every word. "Congratulations on your marriage, Ryan. I thought you should have official confirmation that you're legally free to enter into it." The silence that fell over the immediate area was profound. Guests at neighboring tables stopped their conversations, turning to stare at our exchange with expressions ranging from confusion to fascination. Victoria, who'd been talking to her college roommates at a nearby table, looked over with concern. Ryan's face went through a remarkable series of expressions as he processed what was happening. The shock of receiving divorce papers was compounded by the realization that his ex-wife had just successfully catered his wedding reception, demonstrating exactly the kind of professional capability he'd claimed she'd never possess. "You planned this?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I planned to build a successful business," I corrected him. The timing was just fortunate coincidence. Harrison approached our table, clearly sensing tension but unsure what was happening. "Is everything okay here?" "Everything's perfect," I replied with a genuine smile. "I was just delivering some final paperwork to Mr. Thompson. The catering service has been completed to everyone's satisfaction." Patricia Sterling appeared at my elbow, having noticed the commotion from across the room. "Jessica, is there a problem?" "No problem at all," I assured her. "Just completing some administrative details. I hope you'll consider Capital City Catering for your future events." As I turned to leave, Ryan found his voice again. "Jess, wait." He stood up, the divorce papers still clutched in his hand. "I need to talk to you." "There's nothing to discuss, Ryan," I replied calmly. "Everything that needed to be said is in those documents. Enjoy your new marriage." But he followed me toward the catering station, apparently desperate to have some kind of private conversation. Victoria watched with growing concern as her new husband pursued his ex-wife across their wedding reception. "You did this to humiliate me," Ryan said when he caught up to me near the kitchen area. I turned to face him directly, noting that his composure had completely cracked. The confident man who'd been celebrating his wedding just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely shaken. "I did this to close a chapter of my life professionally and legally," I corrected him. "If you feel humiliated, that's because you're finally seeing the reality of what you gave up." Ryan looked around at the elegant reception, the impressed guests, the flawless service that my team had executed under impossible circumstances. "You really built all this?" "I built all this," I confirmed. "While you were worried about whether I could fit into your social circle, I was developing the skills and relationships to create my own." The conversation was interrupted by Victoria, who approached us with obvious concern about the situation unfolding at her wedding reception. "Ryan, what's going on? People are starting to ask questions." Ryan looked between Victoria and me, clearly struggling to explain the situation without making himself look even worse. "This is Jessica, my ex-wife. She's the caterer tonight." Victoria's eyes widened as she processed this information. "Your ex-wife catered our wedding?" "It's a small world," I said with a smile that was genuinely warm. "Congratulations on..." Your marriage, Victoria. I hope you'll both be very happy together." Victoria studied my face, apparently trying to understand the dynamics of what she'd witnessed. "Thank you," she said carefully, "and thank you for saving our reception. You've done an incredible job tonight." Her graciousness in the face of what must have been a bewildering situation impressed me even more. Whatever Ryan's flaws in judging character, he'd chosen a woman with genuine class and intelligence. "It was my pleasure," I replied sincerely. "I hope you'll consider Capital City Catering for your future entertaining needs." As Victoria led Ryan back to their guests, I returned to my team for the final cleanup phase. The reception was winding down, with guests beginning to leave and our staff efficiently breaking down the service stations. Marcus found me as I was, packing the last of our equipment. "I'm not sure what just happened over there, but every guest I talked to tonight was raving about our service. We're going to be booked solid for the next year." He was right. Throughout the evening, I'd collected business cards and scheduled consultation appointments with some of Austin's most influential families. The Sterling wedding would become the signature event that established Capital City Catering's reputation at the highest levels of society. Tony appeared with a bottle of champagne as we finished loading the trucks. "This calls for a celebration. You just pulled off the most impressive catering feat I've ever witnessed, under circumstances that would have destroyed most people." As we toasted our success in the country club parking lot, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. 18 months earlier, I'd been a waitress married to a man who was ashamed of my work and dismissive of my potential. Tonight, I was a successful entrepreneur who'd just catered one of Austin's most exclusive social events while serving divorce papers to the ex-husband who'd underestimated me. The irony was perfect, but the satisfaction went deeper than simple. Revenge. I'd proven to myself that I could build something extraordinary from nothing but determination and skill. The doubts and limitations that others had imposed on me had been completely irrelevant to my actual capabilities. Helen called as we were driving back to the diner to unload equipment. "How did it go? Did you really serve him divorce papers? At his own wedding?" "I did," I confirmed, still amazed by my own audacity. "It was the perfect ending to that chapter of my life." "And the beginning of the next one," Helen observed. "You know you're going to be the most famous caterer in Austin after tonight?" She was right. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing constantly with booking requests and interview requests from local media outlets fascinated by the story of the waitress who'd built a catering empire and served divorce papers at her ex-husband's wedding. The publicity was invaluable for my business, but the personal satisfaction was even greater. I'd transformed myself from someone who was dismissed and undervalued into someone who commanded respect and admiration from the very social circles that had once seemed inaccessible. 3 months later, Capital City Catering had a permanent staff of 12 people and a waiting list for bookings that extended through the following year. I'd moved into a larger commercial kitchen space and was considering expansion into corporate dining services. The Sterling family had become regular clients, with Patricia referring me to her friends throughout Texas and beyond. Victoria had even hired me to cater a housewarming party at the new home she and Ryan had purchased in Westlake Hills. The relationship between Victoria and me had evolved into something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect and her genuine appreciation for professional excellence. She never asked about my marriage to Ryan, and I never offered details. But there was an understanding between us that transcended the awkward circumstances of our initial connection. Ryan himself had largely disappeared from my daily thoughts. I'd heard through Austin's social network that he was thriving at Sterling & Associates, with David Sterling taking him under his wing as a potential future partner. His marriage to Victoria appeared to be happy, and they'd settled into the kind of affluent lifestyle he'd always aspired to achieve. The divorce papers I'd served at his wedding had been filed and processed without any complications. Our legal relationship was completely dissolved, with no ongoing connections or obligations. He'd gotten exactly what he'd wanted. freedom to pursue his ambitions with a partner who enhanced rather than hindered his social and professional goals. But I'd gotten something even better. I'd discovered that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's recognition or approval. The skills and determination that Ryan had failed to appreciate had been there all along, waiting for the right opportunity to flourish. One evening in late fall, as I was reviewing the books for what had been our most profitable month yet, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. The woman who'd sat in that courthouse 18 months earlier, signing divorce papers and wondering about her future, had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. I was Jessica Martinez, owner of Austin's premier boutique catering service, with financial independence, professional respect, and the satisfaction of having built something meaningful entirely on my own terms. The limitations that others had tried to impose on me had become stepping stones to success they'd never imagined possible. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. It's getting so far ahead that your former doubters have to pay you for the privilege of witnessing your success. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to serve them divorce papers at their own wedding while you're doing it. The universe really did have a sense of humor, and mine had turned out to be the best joke of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.